What would you do if your 3-year-old toddler wandered into the woods and came back with a broken, bleeding German shepherd whose eyes held stories of pain and survival? What started as a terrifying moment turned into one of the most heartwarming, life-changing journeys you'll ever hear. This is not just a story of rescue, it's a story of redemption, healing, and a bond so deep it changed an entire family forever. You do not want to miss this emotional ride. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Pawprints Forever for more incredible real-life pet stories. Like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and comment below, where in the world are you watching from? We read every comment, and we love hearing from our global family. Now get ready, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The sun was barely peeking over the tops of the pine trees when 3-year-old Evan Parker waddled out of the back door of his family's cabin with a half-eaten granola bar in one hand and a red toy truck in the other. It was supposed to be just another quiet weekend in the Tennessee mountains. A short getaway for the Parkers, Sam, Emily, and their only child, Evan. The cabin was a rustic rental with no TV, no cell service, and the kind of quiet that made city people either restless or whole again. Emily had been inside making coffee when she realized the screen door was slightly ajar. "Sam?" she called. "Did you let Evan out already?" Sam, who was still towel drying his hair from a cold morning shower, peeked around the corner. "What? No, I thought he was with you." Panic hit like a punch. Emily dropped the mug, ceramic shattering across the floor, and bolted through the doorway, barefoot, heart racing. Sam was close behind. The woods behind the cabin weren't dense, but they weren't exactly safe either. It had rained the night before, and the ground was slick with mud and pine needles. Fallen branches crisscrossed the trails, and wild animals were known to roam this far up the ridge. "Evan!" Emily shouted, her voice trembling. "Baby, where are you?" There was no answer. Sam ran in the opposite direction, calling louder, his voice echoing through the trees. "Evan!" Then a voice, small, calm, and far too composed for a 3-year-old. "Mummy, come quick." Emily skidded around a cluster of ferns and found her son standing at the edge of a shallow ravine, just a few feet off one of the deer trails. He was crouched low, one chubby hand extended gently in front of him. "What are you doing?" Emily gasped, rushing toward him. Evan didn't look back. "He's hurt." And that's when she saw it. Lying in the underbrush, barely visible through the brambles and early morning mist, was a large German shepherd. He was motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His coat was thick but filthy, covered in dried mud and blood. One hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and his eyes, were open and fixed on Evan with a look that was not fear, but confusion, hesitation, exhaustion. "Emily!" Sam shouted, catching up. "Did you—" He stopped short when he saw them. His little boy kneeling next to a half-dead dog in the middle of the woods. Emily knelt beside Evan, gently pulling him back. "Sweetheart, that's a very big dog. We have to be careful, okay?" Evan looked up at her, calm as ever. "He's sad." Sam stepped forward slowly, watching the dog carefully. "Is he breathing?" "Yes," Emily whispered. "Barely." She leaned closer and noticed a frayed length of rope still tied around the dog's neck. Too tight. His ribs showed through the dirt-caked fur, and his paw pads were cracked and bleeding. "Looks like he's been out here for days," Sam said grimly. "Maybe more." Evan reached out again. "Can we help him, Mummy?" The dog didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. He simply blinked, slowly. Emily took a breath and extended her hand. "Hey, buddy. It's okay. You're safe now." The shepherd let out a low, pitiful sound, somewhere between a whine and a sigh, and rested his head back against the ground. Sam stood. "We can't just leave him. We've got towels and blankets in the truck." Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. "We'll carry him." "You think he'll let us?" "He already let Evan touch him. That's enough for me." It took nearly an hour to get the dog out of the ravine. Sam returned with 2 thick towels, an old camping blanket and a first aid kit. Together, they worked slowly, soothing words, gentle touches, until the dog let them lift him into the makeshift sling. The shepherd whimpered once, but never snapped. Emily rode in the back of the SUV, cradling the dog's head in her lap, whispering to him the whole way, "It's okay, sweetheart, we've got you now, you're not alone." Evan sat beside her, holding the dog's paw like he was comforting a friend with a scraped knee. "He's gonna be okay," Evan whispered. And somehow, the dog seemed to believe him. Back at the cabin, they laid him on an old sleeping bag by the fire. Sam carefully cleaned the wounds, checking for ticks and infection. Emily used her phone's offline first aid guide to identify what could be done until they could reach a vet in town the next morning. The shepherd didn't move much, just breathed, watched, endured. Emily wrapped him in blankets and placed a bowl of water beside him. He didn't drink at first, but after a few minutes he lifted his head and took a few shaky laps. Evan sat cross-legged beside him. "What's his name?" he asked. "I don't know, baby," Emily said gently. "He might not have one." Evan considered this. "Then I'm going to give him one." She smiled. "Oh yeah? What do you think it should be?" Evan looked at the dog for a long time. Then, with absolute certainty, he said, "Ranger." The dog's ears twitched. Sam and Emily exchanged a glance. "Well," Sam said softly, "looks like it fits." And from that moment on, Ranger he was. The dog once discarded in the woods had just been named by the smallest member of the family. And somehow, that made it real. By the time the sun dipped behind the pines that evening, Ranger was resting near the cabin fireplace with a folded towel as a pillow and a light fleece blanket draped gently over his back. His breathing was steadier now, his eyes less glassy. He still hadn't attempted to stand, but there was no doubt he was clinging to life. And something about the calm presence of Evan, who remained by his side almost the entire day, seemed to be helping. Sam cooked a simple dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Emily barely touched hers. Her attention kept drifting back to the dog on the floor. Evan dipped the corner of his sandwich in his soup and then leaned over to whisper to Ranger, "We're having soup. It's good. You can have some when your tummy feels better." Ranger didn't react, but his ear gave the slightest flick. That night, Sam carried Evan to bed, the little boy already half asleep in his arms. Emily kissed his forehead and tucked his favorite stuffed lion beneath his arm. "Mommy," Evan mumbled drowsily. "Ranger can stay with us, right?" "We'll see, sweetheart. First, we need to help him feel better." "But he likes me, I can tell." Emily smiled softly. "I can tell too." Downstairs, the fireplace cast a warm glow across the wooden floorboards. Ranger hadn't moved much, but when Emily sat beside him, he opened his eyes. She ran her fingers gently along the edge of his ear. "You picked the right woods to collapse in, buddy. My boy has a heart big enough to rescue the whole world." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. It was the first sign of joy they had seen. The next morning, they wrapped Ranger gently in the blanket and lifted him into the back of their SUV. Emily had called the nearest vet, Dr. Tessa Moreno, who had agreed to meet them at her clinic even though it was Sunday. The town was 30 minutes away, and for most of the ride, Ranger kept his eyes closed, breathing softly. Evan sat beside him again, whispering things only a 3-year-old could imagine. "Maybe you were a space dog and crashed down here. Or maybe you're a super dog and your powers got hurt. I bet you were looking for a family. That's why you were in our woods." Emily smiled at him through the rearview mirror. Dr. Moreno's clinic was a modest brick building on the edge of town. She was already waiting for them, dressed in jeans and a vet smock, her dark curly hair pulled into a bun. She didn't hesitate when she saw the dog. "Let's get him inside." She examined Ranger with clinical precision and quiet compassion. Her hands were steady but gentle, her voice soothing. She noted the fractured leg, the infected wounds, the severe dehydration. "He's been out there for a while," she said. 2 weeks minimum, maybe more." "Will he make it?" Emily asked. Dr. Moreno glanced at Evan, who was clinging to Sam's hand with wide, worried eyes. She lowered her voice. "I won't lie. It's going to be a fight. But he's young, strong, and someone clearly gave him a reason to hold on." Emily looked at her son. Dr. Moreno continued. "We'll need x-rays, fluids, antibiotics. I'd like to keep him here for a few days." Evan's lip trembled. "But he'll be okay." The vet knelt beside him. "He has a better chance because you found him. You saved his life, kiddo." Evan nodded solemnly. "He saved mine too, even if nobody saw." That made Dr. Moreno pause. She gave Evan a long, thoughtful look, then turned back to Ranger. "We'll do our part now." They visited Ranger every day for the next 4 days. On the second visit, he lifted his head when Evan walked into the exam room. On the third, he licked Evan's fingers. By the fourth, he tried to stand. Dr. Moreno smiled as she observed the dog's progress. "I've seen a lot of strays, fighters, survivors, but I've never seen a dog respond like this to a child. It's like Evan flipped a switch in him." Emily nodded. "He hasn't stopped talking about Ranger since we found him." "You know," Dr. Moreno added thoughtfully, "he might not have just been abandoned. That leg injury, it looks like he was hit by something. Car, maybe. But that rope around his neck, that's not accidental." Sam clenched his jaw. "You think someone left him in the woods?" Dr. Moreno didn't answer directly, but her silence said everything. Emily looked at Ranger, his eyes clearer now, his head resting on his paws as he watched Evan place a crayon drawing on the wall beside the kennel. The drawing showed a stick figure Evan and a big happy dog labeled Ranger standing in front of their cabin, surrounded by trees and a big yellow sun. "I think he found where he was supposed to be," Emily said. And in that quiet exam room with the hum of machines and the soft breathing of a dog that was once forgotten, something unspoken became clear. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a family. By the end of the week, Ranger was standing, wobbly, but upright. His leg was braced and bound with padded wraps, his ribs still prominent beneath his patchy coat, but the light in his eyes had returned. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was presence, awareness, recognition. He had come back from wherever pain had buried him. And he knew who brought him back. "Guess who's ready to go home?" Dr. Moreno said with a smile as she led Ranger out to the front lobby of the clinic. Evan squealed and dropped his toy truck, running straight to the shepherd. "Ranger!" he cried. Ranger's tail wagged furiously. He let out a small, happy bark, his first, then leaned into Evan like a soldier returning home from war. Emily had to look away for a moment, overwhelmed by the emotion. Sam bent to rub behind Ranger's ears. "He's walking better than I expected." "He's healing fast," Dr. Moreno said. "Stronger every day, but keep the walk short for now and no stairs if you can help it. Antibiotics for 2 more weeks, then we'll recheck that leg." Emily nodded. "We're ready." Dr. Moreno smiled at Evan. "And something tells me you're the best medicine he'll ever get." Evan grinned. "He's my best friend now." The ride back to the cabin was quiet and gentle. Evan held Ranger's head in his lap again, humming softly, tracing little circles behind his ears. Back at the cabin, they laid out the same blankets near the fireplace. This time, Ranger settled in without hesitation, like he'd remembered the warmth, the scents, the softness of this place. Like it was his. Evan placed a small chew toy next to him, an offering from his own toy box. "I saved this one," he whispered. "He squeaks. You'll like it." Ranger gave it a polite sniff and nudged it with his nose. Later that evening, when Sam checked back in, The toy was between Ranger's paws. Emily caught the moment on camera. That night, after Evan was asleep, Emily and Sam sat out on the porch, mugs of tea in their hands, the woods alive with the hum of cicadas. Sam exhaled. "He's really something, isn't he?" "He is," Emily said. "And Evan, he's different since we found Ranger." "You mean more attached?" "No," she said, thinking. "I mean deeper, calmer. He's always been sensitive, but it's like he understands something he can't explain, like he knew Ranger needed him before any of us did." Sam looked out into the darkness. Maybe he did. They sat in silence for a while. Then Emily added, "I think Ranger saved him just as much as Evan saved Ranger." The next morning, something remarkable happened. Evan was playing in the front yard, scooping little piles of dirt with a plastic shovel, when Ranger limped over to him and sat down beside him, watching quietly. When Evan picked up his shovel again, Ranger lifted a paw and gently tapped the dirt. "Are you helping me?" Evan giggled. Ranger's tongue lolled out in what looked suspiciously like a smile. Emily, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee, covered her mouth with one hand. It was the first moment Ranger had initiated play. The wall had crumbled. The dog was home. Later that day, they took a slow walk down to the creek behind the cabin. Sam held Ranger's leash, though it quickly became clear it was barely necessary. Ranger didn't try to pull. He stayed close to Evan, mirroring the toddler's small, careful steps down the slope. They reached the water's edge, where dragonflies skimmed the surface, and the sound of rushing water calmed everything in the air. Evan sat on a flat rock. Ranger laid beside him. "This is where I think he came from," Evan said softly, looking up at his parents. "I think he was here, alone." Sam raised a brow. "What makes you think that?" "I don't know," Evan shrugged, "but I think he was waiting. For me." Neither parent said anything for a long moment. Then Emily whispered, "Maybe you're right." Back at the cabin, they sat around the fire that evening, roasting marshmallows. Evan had insisted Ranger be part of the family fire night, even if he didn't like marshmallows. Ranger lay between them, watching the flames flicker, eyes soft and peaceful. Evan leaned against him like he had at the vet. "I love you, Ranger." And though he couldn't speak, Ranger responded the only way he could. He leaned back. That night, after Evan had gone to sleep, Emily heard a noise in the woods, a low, unfamiliar growl. She stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand, only to find Ranger already there. He stood at the edge of the steps, ears up, posture alert. He was watching the tree line. "Protecting." Sam joined her, flashlight in hand. "What is it?" "Nothing," Emily whispered. "Then what's he doing?" "He's doing what dogs like him do," she said, wrapping an arm around herself. "He's guarding the people he loves." Ranger looked back at them, tail slowly wagging. Emily smiled. "He's not going anywhere." The following week passed in a kind of quiet magic that the Parkers hadn't felt in years. Ranger's recovery, though slow, was steady. His limp was still noticeable, especially after long naps, but the fire had returned to his steps. His eyes, once dulled by pain and fear, were now bright, curious and aware. He explored the woods with Evan during their slow walks, never straying far, never leaving his side. Where Evan went, Ranger followed. Whether it was to the sandbox, the vegetable patch, or the living room couch during cartoon hour, Ranger was there, a silent guardian and gentle friend. Emily couldn't stop taking pictures. Some were funny, Evan dressing Ranger in a floppy sun hat. Some were beautiful, Ranger resting with his chin on Evan's knee as the boy flipped through picture books. And some, like the one she snapped of Ranger licking jelly off Evan's cheek during breakfast, were simply priceless. She began uploading them to a small photo journal she kept online for close friends and family. It didn't take long for the images to spread. One post in particular, of Evan hugging Ranger tightly in a field of wildflowers went viral after it was reshared by a local animal rescue group. The caption was simple. A toddler saved this German shepherd's life. Now the shepherd is giving him the world in return. Within 3 days, the post had over 300,000 likes and thousands of shares. People from all over the country flooded the comments. I didn't know how much I needed this today. There's hope in the world again. I'd adopt every rescue dog if I could. This is why. The attention caught Emily by surprise. She hadn't intended to make their story public, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. People asked about Ranger's progress, sent care packages, and even donated to local shelters in his name. One family from Illinois wrote, "We lost our German shepherd last year. Seeing Ranger with your son made us cry and smile. Thank you for sharing him with us." Emily wiped tears from her eyes as she read it. She looked over at Ranger, snoozing under the table while Evan pushed toy trains in slow loops around his feet. "You're becoming something special," she whispered. He opened one eye and blinked at her, tail thumping softly. But not all messages were kind. Tucked between the waves of support, one comment chilled her. "That's my dog. I want him back." It had no name, no contact information, just that line, posted anonymously on a now deleted account. Emily's stomach twisted. She showed it to Sam that night, and they both stared at the screen in silence. "You think it's just some troll?" Sam asked. "Maybe," Emily replied. "But what if it's not?" They'd never really considered Ranger's past in full detail. They knew he had been abandoned, injured, and likely left to die, but the specifics, the backstory, it was still a mystery. Emily called Dr. Moreno the next morning. "I know it's a long shot," she said over the phone, "but could we scan him again? Maybe double-check for a microchip?" "Of course," Dr. Moreno replied. "Bring him in this afternoon." The vet clinic was quiet when they arrived. Ranger walked in on his own now, slow but proud. Evan held the leash like a pro, beaming with the joy only a 3-year-old could contain. "Come on, Ranger. We're going to check your neck for robot parts." Inside, Dr. Moreno greeted them with a warm smile, but her expression turned serious as she passed the microchip scanner over Ranger's neck and shoulders. For a moment, nothing happened. Then beep. A signal. Dr. Moreno's brows lifted. "Well, look at that." Emily's breath caught. "He's chipped." "Looks like it. Let me pull up the number." She typed into her computer. A moment passed, then another. Finally, she frowned. This chip is registered, but it's a very old record, out of state." "Where?" Sam asked. "Texas," she said. "Name on the file is Travis Harlan." Emily exchanged a glance with Sam. "Do you think that's the guy who commented?" Dr. Moreno shrugged. "Can't say. But if this is the owner, we're legally obligated to reach out." "But we saved him," Evan said suddenly. "He's ours now." Dr. Moreno softened. "I know, sweetheart." She turned to Emily and Sam. "I'll make the call. Let's see what they say." Back at the cabin, they waited. The mood had shifted. Evan didn't understand why his parents seemed tense, but even he was quieter than usual. Ranger stayed close to him, resting his head in Evan's lap like he could sense the uncertainty in the air. Later that evening, Dr. Moreno called. "I reached the number listed on the chip," she said. "It was disconnected. I also checked with Texas authorities. Travis Harlan has a criminal record, animal cruelty, among other things." Emily felt her chest tighten. "He was arrested 2 years ago, served time. The address on file is condemned now. If Ranger was his, he either ran off or was dumped when Harlan fled the state." Sam's voice was low. "So legally?" "There's no valid claim. He's yours, as long as you still want him." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "We never didn't." That night, Evan curled up on the couch beside Ranger, his arms wrapped around the dog's broad shoulders. "You don't have to go anywhere," he whispered. "You're home now." Ranger let out a quiet, contented sigh. And Emily knew there would be no more leashes tied to trees. No more dark woods. No more running. Just this. Just forever. The next morning, the air around the cabin felt lighter. Evan raced outside with his tiny hiking backpack, filled with animal crackers, juice box, and his favorite flashlight, just in case, while Ranger trailed after him like a devoted older brother. The two of them had become inseparable. It wasn't just companionship. It was a connection that was almost eerie in its depth. Ranger seemed to know what Evan needed before Evan asked. If the boy was tired, Ranger would lie down quietly beside him. If he was upset, Ranger would nudge his hand or rest his head in Evan's lap. If he laughed, Ranger wagged his tail with joy. It was as if he'd appointed himself Evan's protector. And Evan didn't seem to know how to function without Ranger nearby. Emily had once worried it was too much, that Evan was too young to understand such attachment, but she'd since realized this wasn't dependency. It was healing. For both of them. It was on a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Emily received the call. It wasn't from Dr. Moreno or a family friend or anyone she knew. It was from a man with a gravelly voice who didn't give his name. "You've got my dog," he said, calm but cold. "His name's Reggie, German Shepherd. I saw the pictures online. The boy, the field, the cabin porch. That's my dog. I want him back." Emily froze. Her fingers clenched around the phone. "Who is this?" "I don't think that matters. He was mine first." "No," Emily said slowly. "He's ours now. He was left to die in the woods. You gave up any right to him." There was a pause. "I know where you are," the man said flatly. "Don't make this complicated." Then the line went dead. Emily stood there for a full minute, the silence around her feeling suddenly sharp. She didn't panic. She acted. First she called Sam, who was still at the hardware store picking up supplies. Then she called Deputy Jared Langley, the local sheriff. Within the hour, a patrol vehicle pulled up the gravel driveway. Deputy Langley was a tall, broad man, with a no-nonsense demeanor but kind eyes. Emily handed him the phone number from her caller ID. He frowned. "Untraceable burner, by the looks of it." "You think it's the same man from the chip record?" she asked. "Could be. Could be someone else who thinks they can intimidate you. Either way, that's a threat, and it's documented now." Sam returned a short while later, jaw clenched and eyes scanning the woods like he expected trouble to leap out from behind the trees. They installed new locks, reinforced the gate, and Deputy Langley promised nightly drive-bys for the next few weeks. "You're not alone," he assured them. "Anyone comes around asking for that dog, they'll answer to us." Emily thanked him. But the pit in her stomach didn't leave. That night, after Evan had gone to sleep, she and Sam sat at the kitchen table, whispering over cups of lukewarm coffee. "I hate this," Emily murmured, "that we have to worry about some sick person trying to take him away." "They won't," Sam said. "Not without going through us first." "I don't think Ranger could survive it again." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Neither could Evan." Emily reached out and squeezed his hand. They didn't have to say it out loud. They both knew. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, Ranger lay across Evan's doorway, head resting on his paws, ears flicking at every noise. Watching. Waiting. Guarding. Like he knew. Like he remembered what it felt like to be taken. And he wasn't going to let that happen to his boy. Not now. Not ever. The days that followed were cautious but calm. Deputy Langley kept his word, driving slowly past the Parker family's cabin every evening around sunset. Sometimes he'd stop and chat for a minute, check in, pat Ranger's head through the open window of his cruiser. "He doesn't look like he needs much protection," the deputy chuckled one evening. "I'd be more afraid of him than a locked door." Ranger wagged his tail softly, but his posture was always the same. Alert, still, focused on the woods like they might shift and reveal a shadow at any moment. Inside the house, things tried to return to normal. Sam spent his mornings working on a small side project, building a fence around the vegetable garden. Emily took photos for her blog and helped Evan with puzzles on the porch. But there was tension under it all, a layer of unease they couldn't quite shake. Even Evan felt it. He wasn't frightened, but he was different. Quieter, more watchful. And Ranger never left his side. One late afternoon, after a long nap, Evan wandered into the living room with his stuffed lion and plopped down beside Ranger. The dog had been sleeping, stretched out near the cool tile by the hearth. As Evan settled in, Ranger stirred and shifted closer until his body curved around the toddler protectively. "Mummy," Evan said quietly, resting his chin on Ranger's back. "Yes, sweetheart? Do bad people ever come back?" Emily paused at the sink. The question wasn't surprising, but hearing it out loud still made her heart ache. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "but when we have people and dogs who love us, we don't have to be afraid, because we face it together." Evan seemed to think that over. He looked down at Ranger and whispered something Emily couldn't hear. The dog thumped his tail against the floor in reply. Later that night, Sam was stacking firewood on the porch when he noticed something strange. A boot print. It was pressed into the edge of the muddy trail that led off the driveway. Just one, not fresh, but not old either. And it wasn't his. He crouched beside it, measuring the size against his own boot. Larger. He walked the edge of the property line, eyes scanning the brush, checking for more. Nothing. No other prints. No trash, no broken twigs. Just that one quiet, perfect footprint in the mud. It hadn't rained since Tuesday, which meant whoever it belonged to had been here after the call. Sam went inside, heart pounding. They filed another report with Deputy Langley the next morning. He brought a second officer and a camera to document the print. "Not enough to ID someone, but it tells me what I already suspected," Langley said. "Whoever called you has been nearby." "Why?" Emily asked. "What's the point of watching us? Why not just come knock on the door?" Langley's jaw tightened. "Because this isn't about a dog anymore, it's about control. Some men don't want to reclaim anything, they just want to scare." "Well, it's working," Sam muttered. Langley looked at them both. "Don't let your guard down, but also don't stop living your life. That's what they want. To shrink your world down until you're scared of your own front porch." Emily nodded, even though her fingers trembled. That night, Sam reinforced the doors with longer screws and added a second latch to the back entrance. Emily brought Ranger's bed closer to Evan's room, though the dog rarely stayed in it anymore. He preferred to sleep right outside the boy's door. And just before midnight, Emily peeked down the hallway and saw them both. Evan fast asleep, and Ranger lying across the threshold, head resting on his paws, eyes open, watching the darkness like a sentry. It gave her peace. Not perfect peace, but enough. 3 days passed without incident, and then, just as quietly as the threat had arrived, it disappeared. No more calls, no more comments, no strange cars, no prints. It was like whoever had made that call had either moved on or realized they weren't going to win this time. Emily didn't relax entirely, not yet, but she let herself breathe again, a little deeper, a little slower. And Ranger, he seemed to sense it too. His shoulders relaxed. His tail wagged more freely. He let Evan put sunglasses on him and ride his back like a horse during playtime. The shadow was lifting, and something else was rising in its place. Belonging. One evening after dinner, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sun set through the trees. Ranger lay beside Evan, his head in the child's lap.
"Daddy," Evan said suddenly, "can Ranger go to school with me?" Sam laughed. "I don't think dogs are allowed at school, bud." "But what if I need him?" Sam and Emily exchanged a glance. It was an innocent question, but one filled with something deeper, something important. "I think you'll always need each other," Emily said gently. "But that doesn't mean you can't grow up together." Evan hugged Ranger's neck. "He's my best friend, forever." And Ranger, loyal as the sun that sets and rises again each morning, simply closed his eyes and let the child hold him. Because that's what he was now. Not a rescue, not a project, but family. The seasons began to shift in subtle ways. The heat of summer softened into the golden breath of early autumn. The trees that shaded the Parker family's cabin wore their first hints of red and amber. Mornings grew cooler, dew hanging on every leaf, and with the change something deepened in the air between Evan and Ranger. It wasn't just closeness anymore. It was trust, rooted, permanent, and profound. Ranger's limp had lessened over the weeks. Dr. Moreno was amazed when she did her follow-up exam. "He's healing faster than most dogs in his condition ever do," she said, as Ranger stood calmly beside the exam table. "And it's not just the medicine. It's the environment, the love. It's like he decided he wanted to be whole." Evan clapped his hands in the exam room. "I knew he was a superhero." Dr. Moreno laughed. "You might be right, kiddo." Back at the cabin, life had settled into a comforting rhythm. Every morning, Evan and Ranger did their morning patrol, which consisted of circling the yard while Evan held a wooden spoon like a sword and declared, "The land is safe." Ranger trotted beside him, his ears perked and tail wagging like he was fully committed to the cause. Emily began documenting these daily patrols, posting short clips to the blog and Instagram. Followers from all over the world responded with love. "These two are my favorite part of the internet. I check in every day just to see Ranger's updates. The world is a better place because of this boy and his dog." Donations to the local shelter increased. Someone even shipped Evan and Ranger matching red flannel shirts. Another sent a personalized dog bowl with Ranger Protector of Tiny Humans etched into the side. Ranger sniffed it once and gave a single bark of approval. Evan declared it official. One afternoon, Emily received a message from a woman named Clarissa Jameson, a school counselor in Nashville. She had read their story, watched every video, and now she had a request. "We have several children in our early intervention program, kids dealing with trauma, anxiety, and emotional delays. Would you and Ranger consider visiting? We'd love to introduce him as a therapy dog friend during story time." Emily's first reaction was hesitation. Ranger had never been in a classroom before. Crowds, noise, unknown kids. It could all be overwhelming. But when she looked at him napping in the sun next to Evan, completely at peace, she wondered, maybe this wasn't just about Evan anymore. Maybe Ranger had something to give others too. She turned to Sam that evening and shared the message. Sam rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You think he's ready?" Emily looked down at Ranger, who perked up as if he knew they were talking about him. "I think," she said slowly, "he needs this." The trip was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Emily talked to Evan about it carefully. At first he didn't like the idea of Ranger going anywhere without him. "But what if he needs me?" he asked. "You'll still be there," Emily said. "You can help him help other kids." Evan thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll be his assistant." They made him a badge out of cardboard and string that read, "Ranger's Helper." He wore it proudly. The day of the visit arrived with a clear blue sky and crisp fall air. Ranger rode quietly in the back seat, his head resting on the edge of Evan's booster seat. Emily felt nervous as she parked in front of the school. But when Ranger stepped out of the car, he stood tall, focused, steady, like he knew why he was there. They entered the reading room where a small group of children, Some shy, some chattering, some curled tightly into beanbags, waited with curious eyes. Ranger walked in like he belonged. Not rushed, not hesitant, just present. When Evan sat down in the reading circle, Ranger curled beside him automatically, resting his head on the boy's lap. And just like that, the room changed. The anxious boy in the corner stood and walked over, laying a hand gently on Ranger's back. A girl with a stutter whispered his name aloud. Ranger. A child who hadn't spoken in 2 weeks smiled for the first time in days. The counselor blinked away tears. Emily stood in the doorway, phone forgotten in her hand, watching her dog, once broken and cast aside, become a bridge between fear and hope. After the story, the children took turns brushing Ranger with soft combs and whispering their secrets into his fur. Ranger listened to every word. And when one little boy curled into his side and said, "I wish you could stay forever," Ranger leaned into him just enough to let him know, "I hear you. I'm here. You're not alone." Back in the car, Evan climbed into his seat and sighed like an old man. "I think Ranger made them happy," he said. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I think he did more than that." She looked back at Ranger, who was already drifting to sleep in the back seat, worn out but content. "You gave them peace," she whispered. And for the first time she realized something. Maybe Ranger wasn't just part of their story. Maybe they were part of his, and it was still being written. The visit to the school became a turning point, not just for the children Ranger had comforted, but for the Parkers too. After the Storytime visit went viral, again thanks to Emily's photo blog, a local TV station reached out to do a segment on Evan and Ranger. Then a podcast interviewed Emily about animal-assisted healing. Soon, schools, therapy centers, and even a children's hospital contacted them to ask if Ranger could visit. At first, Emily hesitated. She didn't want to overexpose him or put too much pressure on a dog who had already endured so much. But Ranger seemed to want to go. Every time she picked up his special vest, the one with the stitched words, "Gentle Guardian," on the side, his tail would start wagging. He would stand up, posture proud, as if he knew he was about to do something important. So they began to schedule visits, slowly and carefully, no more than once a week. And each time the same miracle happened. Children who hadn't smiled in days lit up at the sight of him. Teenagers battling depression leaned into his soft fur and breathed easier. Veterans at the rehab center nodded in silent recognition when he approached them, scarred yet standing, seen. And everywhere he went, Evan followed proudly, carrying Ranger's water bottle and telling people, "This is my dog. He saved me first." Back at the cabin, life remained rooted in simplicity. Mornings were for waffles, pine cones, and pretend dragon hunts. Afternoons were for muddy hikes and naps on the sunlit porch. Evenings were for reading, marshmallows by the fire, and Ranger sleeping on Evan's feet. But every now and then, the world would peek back in. Emails from journalists, calls from non-profits, and even one inquiry from a publishing agent who wondered if the story of the Toddler and the Shepherd might be turned into a children's book. Emily declined for now. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about preserving the magic of this real, quiet, powerful thing growing in the woods around their little home. One night, after a long day at the children's hospital, Emily sat out on the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Sam had already gone to bed. Evan was snoring peacefully in his room. Ranger lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes open and watching the trees sway in the moonlight. She took a long breath and said, "You do know you're not a regular dog, right?" Ranger didn't respond, of course, but he thumped his tail once very softly. Emily chuckled. "I keep thinking about the first time I saw you. Tied up, bloody, barely breathing. I didn't think you'd make it through the night." Ranger lifted his head slightly as if to say, "But I did." She reached down and ran her hand along his back. "You changed our lives. You changed my life." And in that moonlit silence, she realized something else. She hadn't just rescued a dog. She had been rescued too. From the fear of letting someone in. From the grief she didn't know she still carried. From the quiet ache of wondering whether she could still open her heart after the world had proven it could hurt. Ranger had taught her how to trust again. A few days later, the Parkers were invited to a small festival in a nearby town celebrating community heroes. Local firefighters, teachers, and medical staff were being honored, and so was Ranger. The organizers called it the Healing Heart Award. Emily accepted it on his behalf, standing on a modest outdoor stage with Evan at her side. She spoke into the microphone, voice gentle but firm. "There's a lot I could say about how we found Ranger, about what he survived, but what matters most is this: he didn't just survive. He gave. He still gives. And if a creature that was abandoned and broken can come back and offer this much love, maybe we all can." The crowd clapped. Some cried. Evan leaned down and kissed Ranger's head, whispering, "You're my hero." Ranger sat calmly through it all, but when the applause swelled, he turned toward the sound, lifted his chin slightly, and barked. Just once. A deep, clear, perfect bark that seemed to say, "I'm here. I matter. And I'm not going anywhere." On the drive home, Evan fell asleep in the back seat, his hand draped over Ranger's back. The sun was setting, casting the mountains in shades of lavender and gold. Emily looked in the rearview mirror and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Sam reached across the seat and took her hand. "We did good," he said. She nodded. "We did." But it wasn't just them. It was the broken dog who'd become whole again. The silent friend who gave voice to healing. The shepherd who had once been left for dead, now teaching others how to live. As fall settled in fully, the cabin came alive in new ways. Emily hung a wreath made of pine cones and dried leaves on the front door. Sam stacked cords of firewood beneath the overhang, preparing for the first frost. And Evan, proudly sporting his favorite flannel shirt, spent his afternoons jumping into leaf piles with Ranger at his heels. Ranger, now nearly fully healed, had regained the strength and grace of his breed, but with a softness that came from learning safety. His gait still held a faint hitch, a reminder of the wound that nearly ended his life, but he moved now with assurance, not caution. He no longer flinched at sudden noises. No longer scanned the woods like he expected someone to emerge from the shadows. Because this place, this child, this family, had become his certainty, and for the first time in his life, Ranger wasn't waiting. He was living one afternoon, as Emily watched Evan and Ranger playing chase through the backyard. She caught a moment she knew she'd never forget. Evan fell into the grass, laughing breathlessly, and Ranger pounced gently beside him, not to tackle, but to lie beside him, their noses nearly touching. Evan reached out and placed a small leaf on Ranger's head. Ranger blinked and didn't move. "You're a leaf king now," Evan whispered. Emily raised her phone and snapped the picture. That image would go on to be printed, framed, and placed above the fireplace, a quiet symbol of joy, of trust, of a bond that had reshaped their world. One evening they received a letter in the mail, an actual letter on real paper, not a text or email. It came from a woman named Caroline Beck, a therapist in Vermont who had followed their story online. "I work with children who have experienced serious trauma, abuse and abandonment, loss. I've been sharing Ranger's story during our group therapy sessions. Many of the kids ask if he's real. Some think he's made up. But then I show them the videos, the photos of Evan and Ranger, and they smile. They hope I just wanted to thank you for not keeping this story to yourselves. You're giving more people than you'll ever know a reason to believe again." Emily cried when she read it.
not from sadness but from something deeper, a kind of awe. What had started as an act of mercy in the woods had become a ripple of healing felt across the country. And it was just beginning. Later that week, Dr. Moreno paid a house call, not as a vet but as a friend. She brought Ranger a gift, a custom-made leather collar engraved with the words, "Ranger brave, beloved, home." It was strong, durable, beautiful. And when Evan fastened it around Ranger's neck, the dog sat taller, like he knew it meant something. "You earned it," Dr. Moreno said, rubbing his ears. "Every inch of it." Then she looked at Emily and Sam. "You know, there are programs for dogs like him. Certified therapy and service dog work, if you're ever interested." Sam raised an eyebrow. "You think he'd qualify?" Dr. Moreno grinned. "He's already doing the job. The rest is just paperwork." Evan lit up. "Can he go to school with me every day then?" "Maybe not quite yet," Emily said with a laugh, "but we'll see." It planted a seed. And in the days that followed, Emily began researching therapy dog certification. It wasn't just a fun idea. It was right. Ranger had proven himself time and again. Now, he could do it officially. The day the certificate came in, the mail was brighter than usual. Evan held it in his tiny hands, eyes wide. "He's a real hero now." Ranger barked once, proudly. Emily rolled it carefully into a keepsake tube. "You've always been one, buddy. Now the world just knows it too." The Parker family threw a small celebration that evening. A backyard picnic with homemade dog treats, hot cider, and a little paper crown that Evan made for Ranger out of construction paper. Ranger wore it proudly. That night, after Evan had gone to sleep, Sam and Emily sat by the fire pit outside. Ranger curled at their feet. Sam poked at the glowing coals. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found him?" Emily didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I think about what would have happened if Evan hadn't found him." Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence for a while, the woods around them humming with the soft sound of wind and crickets. Then Emily whispered, "I used to think we were the ones doing the saving. But now we know better." Ranger looked up at them. And though he didn't understand their words, he felt their hearts. Because dogs like him, they always do. Thanksgiving came to the Parker cabin with the scent of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh-baked cornbread. It was the first time Emily's parents visited since Evan was born, and the little cabin was filled with laughter, warmth, and the clatter of too many dishes in too small a kitchen. But more than that, it was filled with something intangible peace. Evan had spent the whole morning telling his grandparents about Ranger, how he saved him in the woods, how he was a superhero now, and how they had matching red scarves they'd wear for their Thanksgiving Ranger parade. "I don't remember a parade being on the schedule," Sam joked as Evan dragged Ranger through the living room with a ribbon leash and a toy marching drum slung over his shoulder. "It's a secret parade," Evan said seriously, "only for brave dogs and their best friends." Ranger tolerated it all with quiet grace, occasionally licking Evan's cheek when the drum got too loud. That afternoon, while the turkey rested and the pie cooled, Emily and her father stepped out onto the porch with mugs of spiced tea. "She's come alive again," he said softly, watching Ranger and Evan through the front window. "I remember when you were afraid to even love again after everything." Emily nodded. "I was. Until a little boy and a broken dog reminded me what love does." Her father smiled. "That dog isn't broken anymore." Emily looked out at the trees. The breeze scattered amber leaves across the lawn where Evan lay next to Ranger on a blanket, both of them staring up at the sky, whispering about clouds shaped like dragons. "No," she said. "None of us are." The next day, something unusual happened. They received a letter postmarked from Texas with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky and smeared with what looked like oil. If you're the family who has the shepherd with the scar above his right eye and the limp in his left leg, then I owe you thanks. I don't deserve to know where he is now. I did wrong by him. He was smarter than me, stronger than I ever deserved. If he's found peace, you gave it to him. I hope he's forgotten me. I'll never forget him. Sam read the letter twice. The 8th, he said aloud. Travis Harlan. Emily folded the letter in half and slid it into a drawer without a word. She walked to the back door, where Ranger lay sleeping in a patch of sunlight. She watched him for a long moment, then whispered, "You don't need that name anymore. You've got your own story now." Ranger opened one eye, flicked an ear, and closed it again, as if to say, "I know." Winter arrived early that year. The first snowfall dusted the cabin roof in soft white while Evan shrieked with delight, dragging Ranger into the yard to build the first ever snow dog. Ranger rolled in the snow like a puppy, tongue lolling, tail sweeping happy arcs across the fresh powder. Emily captured it all, her camera clicking through tears and laughter as her son and their dog made snow angels, shared mittens, and tried, unsuccessfully, to ride a plastic sled down the hill together. Ranger stayed beside Evan the entire time, his limp almost unnoticeable now, his coat thick and shining. Later, back inside, Evan curled under a blanket beside the fire, cheeks red, hair damp, with Ranger tucked against him. Emily brought them cocoa, marshmallows for Evan, warm broth in a special mug for Ranger. "This is the best day," Evan murmured, half asleep. Emily tucked the blanket tighter around them. "It really is." That night, as the fire crackled and snow fell in lazy flakes outside, Emily sat down and opened her journal, the one she hadn't written in for years, the one she stopped using after a miscarriage and years of quiet pain that stole her words. She turned to a fresh page and began, "Dear Ranger, I know you can't read, but you understand more than most. You walked into our lives with broken bones and bruised memories, and somehow you fixed things we didn't know were still broken. Evan needed you. Sam needed you. I needed you. You've taught us about resilience, kindness, and what it really means to trust again. You came to us in silence and gave us back our voice. You were never meant to be forgotten. You were meant to be found." She closed the journal gently and looked over at Ranger, who had settled beside Evan near the fire. The boy's arm draped over the dog's back. The dog's breathing steady and sure. And for the first time in her life, Emily believed in something unshakable, the idea that sometimes, when the world feels darkest, love doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes it lies half dead in the woods, waiting to be found. The holiday season brought with it a kind of magic that the Parker family hadn't felt in years. Evan's excitement was contagious. He insisted that Ranger needed his own stocking, his own ornament on the tree, and his own place at the dinner table. "Right next to mine," he declared, holding up a chair with a plaid blanket draped over it for Ranger to lie on. Emily smiled, letting her son lead the way as the house transformed with lights, garlands, and the scent of cinnamon and pine. Ranger followed along, tail wagging slowly, accepting decorations placed around his bed and even tolerating a Santa hat for a few quick pictures. He wasn't just adjusting to family life, he was flourishing in it. He knew the rhythms now, the meaning behind soft voices, the trust in quiet touches, the joy in shared silence. On Christmas morning, before the sun had even kissed the snow-covered treetops, Evan came running down the hallway in his pajamas, dragging Ranger behind him by the collar, not out of urgency, but out of sheer enthusiasm. "Come on, Ranger, Santa came. You got presents too." Ranger didn't resist. He trotted behind the boy, tail wagging, ears perked. Under the tree sat a small pile of gifts. Evan tore through his own, books, puzzles, a toy airplane. But the real excitement came when he handed Ranger a neatly wrapped box with bones printed on the paper. "This one's from me," he said proudly. Ranger sniffed it carefully. Inside was a leather chew toy, shaped like a squirrel, and a new red collar with a polished tag engraved with just one word:
family. Sam had helped Evan pick it out weeks earlier. Emily had cried when she saw it. Now she helped fasten it around Ranger's neck. "There," she whispered. "That's what you are. Always." Later that day, Emily posted a photo to her blog. Evan curled up on the couch in his Christmas sweater, Ranger asleep beside him, his new collar glinting in the firelight.
The caption was simple. He wasn't just rescued. He rescued us back. Thousands of likes poured in. Hundreds of comments followed. "I show my kids your story every time they ask for a dog. This gives me hope after losing my best friend last year. Proof that love is louder than cruelty." One message came from a woman in Alaska. "I foster abused dogs, and your story reminded me why I started. Some people ask why we bother. Your family is the answer." Emily showed the message to Sam, who read it twice and said quietly, "We should do more." "More?" Emily asked. He nodded. "Help others. Help the next Ranger." That evening, they sat at the dining table after Evan was asleep, Ranger lying at their feet. Sam opened a notebook. "What if we started something? A foundation, a support network? We already have the platform." Emily stared at him, overwhelmed, and moved. "You think we could?" He looked at her. "You already did. You saved a life, then shared that life with the world." She reached down, rubbing Ranger's head. He shared himself first. By New Year's Eve, the idea had a name: the Ranger Project. Its mission: to support abused, abandoned, and traumatized dogs, especially those who bonded with children in healing relationships. Emily planned to start with a website, sharing recovery resources, connecting families with trusted rescues, and eventually funding specialized training for therapy dogs. The first donations came from blog followers, then strangers, then rescue organizations that had followed the journey from the beginning. It wasn't long before people were asking when the first official therapy visits would begin. Soon, Emily promised, because she knew it was time. One evening, a local reporter came to interview the Parkers for a feature in the regional magazine. She asked Evan, "What makes Ranger special?" The boy thought hard for a moment. Then he smiled. "He listens with his heart." That line became the article's headline, and it stayed with Emily long after the reporter left. Winter deepened. The cabin glowed with warmth each night, firelight dancing on the walls, soup simmering on the stove, laughter echoing in the small kitchen. Ranger remained Evan's shadow. But his circle had grown. Now he was also a partner in a mission, a symbol, a beginning. And every time Emily caught a glimpse of him, sitting patiently as Evan read him bedtime stories, walking gently beside a nervous child at a therapy center, or leaning into a grieving soldier's side, she felt it again. That quiet, powerful truth: some souls don't come to stay, they come to save. And Ranger? He was both. By early January, the snow had thickened across the hills, painting the world in hushed whites and silvers. The forest behind the cabin stood tall and still like a living cathedral. The Parker family's routines adjusted to the colder weather, more time inside, more warm meals, and plenty of fireside snuggles. But Ranger? He loved the snow. He bounded through drifts with Evan, his strong legs kicking up powder as he followed the boy's trail of laughter. His limp, once a daily reminder of pain, had now become barely noticeable, more a badge of honor than a burden. Emily watched from the porch as the two best friends flung snowballs and rolled down small slopes in their makeshift sled. "They were made for each other," she whispered to Sam. "Or maybe they remade each other," he replied. The Ranger Project launched officially on January 15th. The website went live with stories, rescue links, training resources, and a page where people could submit stories of dogs who helped them heal. Emily had poured herself into it, working during Evan's naps, staying up late to write entries and answer emails. Within days, it went viral. National outlets picked up the story. Radio stations requested interviews. Emails poured in by the hundreds. One from a woman in North Carolina read, "I rescued a pit mix last year after my daughter passed away. I didn't know how to survive. I saw your blog when I was ready to give up. It reminded me that healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like finding a new reason to keep going. Thank you." Another from a man in Oregon. "My son has autism. We fostered a senior dog last spring and it changed everything. He speaks more, sleeps better. You gave our experience a name. You gave us hope." Emily cried almost every night reading the messages. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of connection. And Ranger, ever calm, ever close, would nudge her hand with his nose and rest his head in her lap, as if to say, "You're doing what you were meant to do." Then came the request. A military hospital in Virginia had reached out after reading a piece about Ranger's visits to the children's hospital. They wanted to invite him for a special event, a therapy day for veterans dealing with PTSD. At first, Emily was hesitant. The distance, the pressure, the vulnerability of it all. But Ranger's story was theirs. And the very heart of the Ranger Project was this, turning pain into purpose. So they said yes. The drive to Virginia was long but beautiful. Evan sat in the back seat with a stack of picture books, and Ranger curled up beside him, head on the boy's leg. Every hour or so, Emily would hear Evan reading aloud, half correctly pronouncing words and pausing to explain the pictures to his furry passenger. "This one is about a knight. That's kind of what you are, Ranger. A knight with a tail." The event was held in a large sunlit room inside the hospital. 20 veterans, some in wheelchairs, some with service dogs of their own, gathered quietly around a circle of chairs. Some were laughing, some were guarded. All had seen more than the world ever should have asked of them. When Ranger entered, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden gasps or tears, just a stillness. Then, one by one, the veterans opened up. One man in a worn army jacket knelt slowly and placed a hand on Ranger's shoulder. "You got the eyes," he whispered, "like you've been through something." Ranger didn't move. He simply stayed still. Present, open, safe. Another man said, "I haven't petted a dog in 15 years. I was afraid I'd break down, but he makes it feel okay." A woman with scars across her palms held Ranger's face between her hands and said, "You get it, don't you?" And Ranger thumped his tail once, so gently it made the room go still. Later, in a quiet hallway, one of the hospital coordinators pulled Emily aside. "I've seen therapy dogs work their magic before," she said. "But this is something else. Your dog doesn't do therapy. He is therapy." Emily swallowed hard. That's who he's always been. That night in the hotel room, Evan curled up in bed beside Ranger, arms around his neck. "You were amazing today," he whispered. "You gave all those people your calm." Ranger exhaled slowly, content. Emily sat in the armchair by the window, the lights of the city blinking beyond the glass. She watched them for a long time, her son sleeping soundly, held by a creature who had once been thrown away, now worth more than words. And she thought, he was never just a rescue. He was a reason. When the Parkers returned home from Virginia, something about the air around the cabin felt changed. It wasn't the weather, though a February thaw had left the snow in slow retreat, revealing patches of muddy earth beneath. It wasn't even the forest, which stood still and quiet as ever. It was Ranger. He carried something different in his stride. A weight lifted. A purpose sharpened. He had traveled beyond the familiar, shared his calm with strangers, and returned not just as a companion, but as a healer. Emily noticed it immediately. He no longer waited by the front door for Evan. He anticipated him. He moved with an assurance that said, "I belong. This is mine to protect. These are my people." And Evan, now nearly 4, had grown in his own way. He told stories more confidently, shared his feelings more clearly, slept more soundly. Emily hadn't fully understood the depth of the trauma Evan had been carrying after a difficult year of night terrors and separation anxiety. But now, with Ranger always nearby, Evan had become anchored. March arrived with early wildflowers peeking through the thawing earth and the sound of birds returning to the woods. On one particularly warm afternoon, Sam suggested they take a walk to the ridge, a trail they hadn't explored since last autumn. It wound through a wooded path behind the cabin, up to a rocky overlook with a stunning view of the valley. Evan jumped at the chance, pulling on his little hiking boots and stuffing his backpack with raisins and a plastic compass. Ranger was already by the door when they stepped out, leash hanging unused by the coat rack. He didn't need it anymore. He stayed close, always. The hike was slow, deliberate, full of stops to inspect worms, sticks, and curious pawprints in the dirt. Ranger sniffed everything, watched everything. And Evan, with cheeks flushed from the climb, narrated the whole journey like a travel show host. They reached the ridge just as the sun slipped toward the horizon. Evan plopped down on a rock and shared his raisins with Ranger, who politely sniffed, then declined. Emily sat beside them, arm around her son, eyes scanning the wide sky. "This is where you found him," Sam said quietly, stepping beside her. She nodded. "Down by that bend, right after the storm." Sam looked at Ranger, who now lay at Evan's feet, relaxed but alert. "I remember thinking he wasn't going to make it through the night. And now he's changed 100 lives," Emily whispered. "No," Sam said, "he's changed ours." They stayed until the air turned cool and the sky painted itself in streaks of lavender and gold. As they walked back down, Evan held Ranger's leash, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. "This is where we met," he told Ranger, pointing to a mossy log. "Right there. You were all hurt and sleepy, and I said, 'Can we help him?'" Ranger glanced up at him, tail flicking. "You don't have to say thank you," Evan added. "I already know." Emily trailed behind, her chest tight with love. She didn't take a photo. She wanted to keep this moment unframed, unposted, just hers. Later that night, Evan asked the question she hadn't been expecting. "Mummy, when I grow up, will Ranger still be here?" Emily paused. He sat cross-legged on the rug, brushing Ranger's back with a soft comb. Ranger's eyes were closed, tail flicking gently with each stroke. "I don't know, baby," she said gently, "but I hope so." Evan looked down, quiet for a long time. "Maybe even if he's not here, he'll still be with me, right?" Emily swallowed. "Yes, sweetheart, always." And Ranger, as if understanding the weight of those words, let out a deep, contented sigh. That night, Emily opened the journal again. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "Dear Ranger, you've given us more than healing. You've given us a map. You've shown us how to keep moving even when we've been lost. I used to think you were the miracle, but now I see you're the reminder that we're all capable of becoming something more than what the world tried to make of us. And that love, true, patient, enduring love, isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about walking beside it until it grows strong again." She set the pen down, walked to Evan's room and peeked in. The boy was asleep, Ranger curled at his side. Together as always. And Emily knew. This was more than a season of healing. This was a lifetime in the making. Spring burst onto the mountain with the kind of beauty that demanded to be noticed. The hills around the cabin bloomed in wild hues, purple phlox carpeting the ground, dogwoods unfurling their soft white blossoms, and the first fireflies teasing the dusk. The icy hush of winter gave way to the music of birds and frogs, to the creak of growing branches and babbling streams.
And through it all, Ranger and Evan moved like twin stars in orbit. They had their routines, morning rescue missions in the yard where Evan pretended to save plush animals from pretend disasters, while Ranger played along like a faithful firefighter or forest guard. Afternoon naps on the porch, quiet bedtime stories read with one small hand resting on soft fur. It wasn't just companionship anymore. It was kinship. The kind of bond time doesn't weaken, only deepens. One Sunday morning, Emily sat with her coffee in hand, watching the two of them outside. Evan was crouched in the dirt, making what looked like a fort out of twigs and pebbles. Ranger lay beside him, head down, tail sweeping slowly behind him as if content to simply be there. "You ever think we were meant to find him?" Emily asked Sam, who stood beside her on the porch, arms crossed. "Every day," Sam said. They fell into a quiet moment, watching as Evan leaned close to Ranger and whispered something. Ranger responded with a gentle nudge of his nose, and Evan laughed. "That boy's different now," Sam added. "More confident, stronger." "So is Ranger," Emily said. They didn't say it aloud, but they both knew. This was no accident. Ranger hadn't just needed rescuing. He'd needed Evan. And maybe, just maybe, Evan had needed him even more. That week, the Parkers received an invitation. A national animal welfare organization had chosen Ranger to receive an award at their annual gala. The title? The Heart-Healed Hero. They were hosting it in Nashville with guests from around the country, veterinarians, rescue advocates, therapy dog handlers, and families like theirs. Emily hesitated at first. They didn't chase attention, never had. But Ranger's story had inspired so many, and this felt different. It wasn't fame. It was recognition for every creature who had ever been thrown away and yet found the strength to love again. The night of the gala was perfect. The ballroom was filled with soft music, elegant lights, and stories that made everyone cry at least once. The Parkers dressed in simple, classic clothes, Evan in a little bow tie that he insisted made him look brave, and Ranger in a black service vest embroidered with silver thread. When they walked into the room, people stood. Not for the family, for him, for the dog who had once been found broken in the woods. Now walking tall, whole, seen. During the ceremony, Evan was invited on stage to introduce Ranger. Standing on a small step stool, holding the mic with both hands, he said, "This is Ranger. He was hurt before, but he let me help him, and then he helped me. We play and read and do hero stuff together, and he listens with his heart. That's why I love him." The applause was thunderous. Ranger didn't bark, he didn't move. He just sat at Evan's side, eyes focused, calm and proud. Emily cried silently in her seat. Sam placed a hand on her back. "This," he whispered, "is what healing looks like." After the event, several guests approached to share their stories of rescue dogs who helped them through grief, of animals who comforted children who couldn't speak, of pets who knew how to love even after they'd been hurt. One man, a retired firefighter, knelt before Ranger and placed a small badge in the dog's vest pocket. "From one protector to another," he said. Ranger leaned forward and licked his hand. Back at the cabin days later, life returned to its usual rhythm. But something lingered. The quiet awe that follows witnessing something sacred. Emily sat on the porch swing one evening, Ranger curled beside her, Evan inside napping after a long day of play. She looked down at the dog's face, the same face that once watched her with guarded suspicion in a forest ravine. Now resting without fear, without doubt. She pulled out her journal and wrote, "Dear Ranger, that night in the woods I thought we were rescuing you, but now I see. You were rescuing all of us. You taught us not to ask why something happened, but to ask what we can do with it now. You taught my son what love looks like when it shows up quietly, with patience and scars. You've become his mirror, his shadow, his steady heartbeat.
And because of you, I see the world through softer eyes. You're not just a survivor, you're a beacon. And every time someone says, I didn't know love could look like that, I smile. Because we do. She closed the journal, leaned back against the swing, and let the quiet wrap around her like a blanket. And Ranger, he stayed close. As he always would, as he always had. Summer arrived in a golden hush, blanketing the Tennessee hills with warm breezes, soft sunrises, and the sweet perfume of wild honeysuckle. At the Parker cabin, life unfolded in the gentle rhythm that had come to define their days, slow, intentional, filled with small joys that meant more than the world ever realized. Evan, now a bit taller, a bit braver, spent long afternoons building forts out of sticks and stones with Ranger ever present beside him. They were knights, astronauts, rangers, explorers, always together, always in some made-up adventure where Ranger never once played the villain. He was the brave one, the strong one, the friend who never left. And each evening, after dinner and books and baths, Evan would fall asleep with his arm thrown over the dog who had once been left to die, now his anchor in the world. Emily's work on the Ranger project had grown beyond anything she imagined. It started as a blog, then a website, and now, just months later, it had become a movement. Families from across the country were reaching out, sharing stories, photos, and gratitude. Shelters were partnering with them, using funds from donations to launch programs that connected therapy-ready rescues with children in trauma recovery programs. One of the most touching stories came from a single father in Michigan. My daughter hasn't spoken to anyone but her cat since the accident. Then she met a dog through your project, Lola. She talks to her every night now. And last week she talked to me. Thank you. Another came from a military base in California. Your story was shared during a briefing on mental health support. I didn't think it applied to me. Then I saw the video of your boy and that shepherd. I cried for the first time in years, and now I'm in therapy because of that dog. Emily printed these messages and pinned them on a bulletin board above her desk. Not as trophies, as reminders of why this all mattered. One quiet afternoon, Emily sat on the back porch with Ranger lying at her feet. A soft breeze rustled the tall grass, and the scent of fresh-cut wood from Sam's workshop drifted through the air. Evan was inside drawing pictures of Ranger World, a fantasy kingdom where dogs ruled kindly and humans were their loyal companions. Emily sipped iced tea and leaned down to rub Ranger's ears. "You're a legend now," she whispered. Ranger glanced up at her, his brown eyes warm. "But you've never needed the world to see you. You just needed us." And they had needed him, more than they knew. The next day brought a surprise. Dr. Moreno called with news. "You remember that therapy dog summit I told you about?" she said. "They want Ranger to be the keynote spotlight." "It's not just about him being a therapy dog. It's about what he represents." Emily blinked. "You mean, like, fly him out, speak? They'll cover everything," the vet said. "They want you, Sam, Evan, and of course Ranger. They're calling him the symbol of second chances." Emily looked at Ranger, curled up by the fireplace, his head resting on Evan's blanket. He thumped his tail once. "I think he'd be honored." Preparing for the trip wasn't easy. Evan insisted on packing Ranger's favorite toy, a rubber squirrel named Buster, and made Emily promise they wouldn't go anywhere he couldn't follow. "He gets nervous if I'm gone too long," Evan said solemnly. "He gets nervous." Emily laughed. "I think that goes both ways." The summit was held in Colorado, in a beautiful lodge nestled between evergreens and blue skies. There were therapy dog teams from all over the world, labs who visited burn victims, border collies who worked with autistic teens, golden retrievers trained to detect seizures. But none had a story quite like Ranger's. When Ranger walked into the main hall, the room quieted, and then erupted into applause. He didn't bark. He didn't cower. He simply walked with quiet dignity to the front of the room, Evan by his side, and sat like he belonged. Because he did. Emily gave a brief speech, just a few words about trauma, trust, and transformation. And then Evan took the mic. Ranger is my best friend. He helps me sleep. He helps me smile. He helped me be brave. And now he helps lots of people. I think he was always a helper, even when he was hurt. That's what makes him a hero. The room stood again. Ranger turned his head, leaned into Evan's side, and let out a slow, steady breath. That night, as they lay in the hotel room under soft sheets and quiet stars beyond the window, Evan curled up against Ranger's chest and whispered, "We're not done helping people, right?" Ranger didn't move, didn't need to. The answer was in the stillness. Back at the cabin a few days later, life resumed. Quiet, grounded, beautiful. But there was something new now. A sense of legacy. Emily knew their story would never be finished. Because healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one pawprint at a time. And Ranger? He would keep walking it beside them, ahead of them. And always, always beside the little boy who once found him broken in the woods and built a whole new world around his heartbeat. The mountain air grew thicker with green as late summer deepened, and the forest surrounding the Parker cabin pulsed with life. Crickets sang their evening lullabies. Fireflies blinked like scattered stars. The world, it seemed, had fully awakened. And so had Ranger. Every step he took carried the quiet confidence of a dog who had nothing left to fear and everything left to give. Emily watched him one morning as he padded across the backyard with Evan, now 4.5, chatting non-stop beside him. They had taken to holding meetings beneath the big oak tree at the edge of the yard. Evan would sit cross-legged with a notebook making pretend plans, while Ranger lay beside him, ears flicking attentively. Today's topic? How to make the world better for all dogs ever. Step 1, more belly rubs. Step 2, always have snacks in your pocket. Step 3, never leave a dog in the woods. That evening, Emily received a phone call from a documentary filmmaker based in New York. "We're working on a film about animal-human healing," the woman explained. "We've interviewed war veterans, trauma counselors, even prisoners, and we came across your story. It's something else. Would you consider participating?" Emily hesitated. "We're just a family with a dog." "You're a family with hope," the filmmaker replied. "That's what people need." Emily glanced toward the living room where Evan lay on the rug building a block tower. Ranger, as always, was curled beside him, watching over every piece. She took a breath. "Okay, let's talk." The film crew arrived 3 weeks later. Just 2 people, quiet and respectful. They stayed for 2 days, capturing candid shots. Ranger watching birds at the window, Evan reading to him under a blanket fort, Sam repairing the porch steps while Ranger kept guard beside his toolbox. They interviewed Emily on the back porch, crickets singing in the background. "What's the one thing you've learned from Ranger?" the director asked. Emily looked away for a moment, then back. "That the past doesn't define the soul," she said. "What we do with our second chance does." Evan's part in the film was unscripted. They asked him, "What makes Ranger special?" And he replied, "Because he lets me be all the things. Brave, sad, silly. He's okay with it. He stays." Ranger, lying beside him, licked his face gently. The crew caught the moment on film. One of them wiped their eyes. A week after the crew left, Emily received a small package in the mail. Inside was a copy of the short film, beautifully edited and titled The Listener. There was also a note. "We've never seen anything quite like this. Thank you for reminding us that the quietest love can be the loudest healing." Emily, Sam and Evan watched it together that night on the couch. Ranger lay between them, his head on Evan's lap. When the credits rolled, Evan whispered, "That's us."
Emily kissed the top of his head. Yes, baby, that's us. As fall approached again, Emily noticed something in herself, a longing to expand, to give back more. The Ranger project had grown steadily, with enough donations now to hire a small team. They built a new section on the website to feature adoptable healer dogs, rescues already thriving in foster care and ready to be matched with kids in need of emotional support. Within the first week, 3 dogs found homes. The week after, 5 more. Each story made Emily cry. Each match was a thread in the growing tapestry that Ranger had unknowingly started the day he stepped out of those woods. That month they held their first local Ranger project gathering in the park, a meet and greet for families, therapy dogs, and foster pups. People drove in from hours away. There were booths, doggy treat stations, story circles, and healing corners where kids could sit quietly and talk to dogs without pressure. At the center of it all stood Evan and Ranger. They were surrounded by children, volunteers, and even a few elderly visitors who simply wanted to meet the dog who changed everything. Ranger took it all in calmly, with patience, with grace, with the silent, steadfast love that had come to define his life. That night, Emily sat alone in her office, scrolling through the photos from the day. Evan hugging a puppy, Sam handing out water bottles, Ranger lying at the foot of an elderly woman's wheelchair while she held his paw and smiled. She opened her journal and wrote, "Dear Ranger, I used to wonder what made you choose us, but now I see it wasn't choice. It was fate. You found your way into our world like a whisper that refused to go unheard. And now you echo everywhere, in every child you comfort, in every heart you help open, in every life you make feel seen. You are the bridge between pain and peace, and we are forever honored to walk it beside you." She closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and stepped into the quiet night, where Ranger stood at the doorway, waiting, as he always did, as he always would. The first chill of autumn crept into the mornings with mist hovering low over the ground and the sharp scent of damp leaves curling in the air. At the Parker cabin, the fireplace burned a little longer each evening, and Evan had traded his summer sandals for little brown boots. Ranger remained a constant shadow at his side, his coat now thick and glossy from a year of love, safety, and recovery. The scar over his eye was still visible, a subtle line beneath the fur, a quiet testimony to the battles he'd survived. But no one who looked at him now saw a victim. They saw a veteran of healing, a survivor, a guide. One cool Saturday morning, Emily packed a small picnic, and the family drove down to the lakeside trail, one of their favorite spots, tucked away from the busier parts of town. Ranger rode in the back seat, nose against the open window, his ears flicking in the wind as the world rushed past in gold and amber. They hiked slowly, Evan stopping every few steps to collect leaves he deemed magical or important to Ranger's kingdom. Ranger sniffed each one solemnly before approving it with a soft wag. Eventually, they reached the clearing by the lake, a wide, grassy patch surrounded by tall pines. Emily laid out the blanket. Sam unpacked the thermos of cider. Evan ran toward the water's edge, Ranger galloping behind him. There, by the shimmering lake, as geese crossed overhead and the world moved gently around them, the Parkers simply were, together, whole, and free. After lunch, Sam walked a short trail with Evan while Emily stayed behind with Ranger, brushing leaves from his back. "You know," she said softly, "when I think about where you started and where you are now, it feels like watching a miracle in slow motion." Ranger blinked up at her, his eyes warm and full. "You found your way out of the dark," she continued, "and you brought a lot of people with you." She kissed the top of his head. "Thank you." Later that evening, back at the cabin, Evan sat cross-legged on the floor with a small notebook in his lap and a pen in his hand. Emily leaned over from the couch. "What you writing, bud?" "It's my book," Evan replied proudly. It's called The Boy and the Brave Dog. Emily's heart clenched. Oh yeah? She smiled. What's it about? It's about me and Ranger and how we found each other and made everything better. Can I read it? Not yet, he said. I want to finish it first. It's going to have pictures too, but not ones from your camera, just ones I feel. Emily didn't press further. She just let that sentence sit in her heart like a stone in still water. Just ones I feel. It was exactly what Ranger had taught them all. A few days later, Emily received a message from the children's hospital they had visited earlier in the year. A young patient named Lily, who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, had begun talking to her therapy dog after watching Ranger's story in the hospital media room. She says she wants a dog just like him, the nurse wrote. She calls him her brave friend. Emily showed the message to Evan. He ran to Ranger, hugged him tight and whispered, "You're helping even when you're not there." Ranger, patient and proud, rested his head on Evan's shoulder. On the first frost of the season, Emily woke early to find the yard silvered with ice. Breath hung in the air. The world looked paused, still and sharp. She stepped outside in her robe, Ranger padding beside her. Together they walked the path behind the house, the one that led to the old grove where Evan had first found him. The trail was quieter now, grown over in paths, but they remembered. She stopped beside the mossy log and crouched. "This is where it started," she whispered. "Right here." Ranger stood still, his eyes fixed on the trees. And then slowly he sat. Not from pain, but from peace. Emily closed her eyes and took a long breath, then opened them again, knowing what had to come next. That afternoon, she and Sam sat at the kitchen table while Evan drew stick figure dogs in his notebook. "I want to write it all down," Emily said. "Everything. The day we found him, what he taught us, what he gave the world." "You mean, like a book?" She nodded. "For Ranger, for Evan, for every kid who needs to believe that broken things can still become beautiful." Sam smiled. "I think it's already written. You've been writing it every day." Emily looked toward the fireplace, where Ranger lay curled on his blanket. She whispered, "I just need to find the right ending." But deep down she knew there wasn't one. There would never be an end to the love Ranger had given. Only continuations, only lives touched, hearts opened, paths lit. One step, one pawprint, one story at a time. The weeks rolled on, painted in the soft browns and golds of late autumn. The leaves had mostly fallen, blanketing the ground in a quiet crunch, and the days grew shorter, evenings arriving like a hush over the mountains. At the Parker cabin, the rhythm of life continued like a familiar song. Evan now spent his afternoons working diligently on his book, The Boy and the Brave Dog, sketching stick figures of himself and Ranger on every page. He used crayons with full concentration, choosing browns and greys for Ranger's fur, blue for the sky, and red for the cape he insisted Ranger wore when no one was looking. "Because he's a hero, Mummy," Evan would say. "Heroes always wear capes, even if you can't see them." Ranger would lie beside him, watching every crayon stroke, occasionally licking his hand when Evan leaned in too close. Emily kept every page Evan finished, tucking them into a folder on her desk. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but something told her this story needed to be shared, not just Ranger's but Evan's too. Together, they had built something bigger than a bond. They had created a testament. One frosty evening, as the family sat around the fireplace, Sam looked up from his mug of cider and said, "I've been thinking." Emily glanced over. "About what?" He nodded toward Evan and Ranger, curled up together on the floor with a blanket and a pile of dog-eared books. "We should adopt another dog." Emily blinked. "Another dog?" "Yeah," Sam smiled. "Not to replace Ranger,
Nothing could ever do that. But think of what he could teach a new one, especially a rescue. It could be Ranger's apprentice. Evan's head popped up. Ranger gets a sidekick. Emily laughed, but something warm settled in her chest. The idea didn't feel like a disruption. It felt like continuation, like a ripple that Ranger had started, ready to extend. They spent the next week quietly searching local rescue listings. Emily reached out to their network through the Ranger Project, asking for dogs who needed not just a home, but healing. They found her in a shelter 2 towns away, a skittish, underweight border collie mix named Willow. She had been rescued from a neglect situation, afraid of sudden movements, loud voices, and open spaces. But when they brought Ranger in to meet her, something remarkable happened. Willow, trembling at the back of the kennel, stopped shaking. She inched forward, sniffed Ranger's nose, and then pressed her head gently into his shoulder. The shelter director gasped. She hasn't approached anyone like that. Ranger looked up at Emily, calm and certain, and Emily knew. He had chosen her, just like Evan had once chosen him. Willow's first days at the cabin were quiet and careful. She moved like a ghost, always watching, always hesitating. She flinched when doors creaked and tucked herself into corners when Evan laughed too loudly. But Ranger! He never left her side. He walked slowly when she did. He lay still when she hovered nearby. He never pushed, just waited, and after a few days Willow began to follow him. Not close, but closer. By the end of the week she was eating beside him. By the second week she was sitting by Evan's chair at story time. And by the third week she let Evan pet her head. The look on Evan's face when she did was pure joy. She's learning, he whispered, just like Ranger did. He's her teacher now. Emily swallowed a lump in her throat. Ranger thumped his tail softly. That evening, Emily added a new page to Evan's book, a picture of Willow drawn with loving, wobbly lines, nestled between stick-figure Evan and a noble, smiling Ranger. She titled it, The Family Grows. The next few weeks unfolded like gentle magic. Willow began sleeping closer to Ranger, then to Evan's bed, and finally curled at his feet during naps. She grew stronger, her coat thickening, her eyes brighter. She started to play slowly at first, chasing leaves and nosing around in the grass beside her big brother. And everywhere she went, Ranger was near, guiding, teaching, trusting. One afternoon, Emily watched them running through the backyard, Evan shouting, Ranger sprinting ahead, and Willow trailing behind, barking softly, her tail finally wagging like she believed she was safe. Emily turned to Sam with tears in her eyes. This isn't just a happy ending, she said. It's a legacy. Sam nodded, wrapping an arm around her. Ranger gave us that. They looked out at the three of them, boy, shepherd, and collie, chasing joy in the golden light of a world once broken, now beautifully whole. The first snow of the season arrived, like a whisper in the night. When Evan awoke the next morning and peeked through the window, he gasped. The world had been painted in white, soft, thick, glistening. Trees were draped in snowflakes. The roof of the cabin wore a frosty crown. The fields were untouched, like a blank page waiting for a story. He ran down the hallway in his pajamas, calling out, Ranger! Willow! It snowed! By the time Emily reached the door, both dogs were already circling excitedly, their tails wagging in unison. Moments later, all three were bundled up, or collared in the dog's case, and bursting out into the wintry world. Ranger, ever the steady leader, charged into the snow like a warrior returning to familiar ground. Willow, hesitant at first, took smaller, cautious steps until she saw Evan fall backward into the snow and start flapping his arms and legs. "Snow Angel!" he shouted, giggling. Willow crept closer, tail flicking. Ranger barked once. And with a little hop, Willow leapt into the snow beside Evan, rolling awkwardly onto her back. Emily caught the moment with her camera just as Evan reached over and gently took her paw. "You did it," he whispered. "You're part of the team now." The photo would become the cover image of the next update on the Ranger Project website. The caption was simple: "Healing comes in pairs now." That December was one of the happiest months the Parkers could remember. They celebrated Willow's Gotcha Day with a homemade dog-safe cake, a party hat, and a small crowd of neighbors and fellow rescue advocates. Ranger, now the dignified mentor, sat at the head of the picnic table like a proud uncle, calmly letting Willow soak in the attention. Sam grilled burgers. Evan gave a dramatic speech about the brave girl who joined the family, and Emily handed out hot cider and tissue packs. "I still can't believe it's been over a year," she said quietly to Dr. Moreno, who attended with her own dog. "It feels like a lifetime, and also like it just started." Dr. Moreno smiled. "That's how you know it was the right rescue, when time doesn't measure the love." On Christmas Eve, the family gathered around the fireplace, a fresh tree twinkling in the corner, stockings hung with care. Evan handed out his homemade gifts. For Sam, a drawing of him fixing the fence with Ranger supervising. For Emily, a glitter-glued heart with the words, "Thank you for finding Ranger." And for Ranger and Willow, matching collars with tiny jingle bells and a note that read, "You saved me, now we save others." Emily couldn't stop crying as she fastened Ranger's collar. "You've been giving your whole heart since the moment we found you," she whispered. "And now you've passed that heart on." Ranger leaned into her, eyes soft, steady. Willow nudged her other side. It felt like a circle had closed. But not the story, the chapter. On New Year's Day, they received a message from a children's hospital in Arizona. One of the nurses had discovered the story of Ranger and Willow and now wanted to collaborate with the Ranger Project to create a traveling program, visiting pediatric wards with certified rescue therapy pairs. "We'd call it Hope on Pause," the message read, "and we want your help to build it." Emily printed the email, stared at it for a long time, then turned to Sam. "We're going national." He smiled. "Ranger's not just healing hearts anymore, he's starting movements." That night, she opened her journal to write again. "Dear Ranger, you were once a shadow at the edge of the trees. We didn't know your name, or your pain. But now we know both. You gave us a year of miracles, of lessons, of moments stitched into our bones. And now you've given us Willow. You've given us purpose. I see it clearly now. You weren't just our rescue story. You were the beginning of a legacy. And we'll carry it forward, every day, every mile, every life touched by the silence that love can speak." She closed the journal softly and looked over at the fireplace where both dogs lay sleeping side by side. Evan was curled in his beanbag, one hand resting on Willow's back, and Ranger's paw stretched out just enough to touch them both. Guarding, guiding, giving. Spring returned as softly as it had left, slipping across the mountains on warm breezes and bursts of green. Wildflowers stretched towards the sun again. Birdsong filled the air, and the world, like the Parkers, seemed to exhale. It had been nearly 2 years since the day Evan found Ranger in the woods. 2 years of healing, of learning, of love. Ranger, now a little grayer around the muzzle, moved with a slow grace. His limp had returned slightly with age, but it carried no pain, only memory. He spent most days following Evan around the yard, basking in sunbeams, or watching Willow charge across the grass like a comet. She had grown into a confident, joyful soul, a dog reborn through steady affection and Ranger's quiet mentorship. She was faster than him now, stronger in ways that came with youth. But she always circled back to check on him, to walk beside him, to lay beside him when the sun got low and the shadows crept long. Evan called them the Guardians. "I'm the knight," he'd say proudly, "but they're the real heroes." One golden afternoon, Emily sat on the porch swing with her journal in her lap and Ranger's head resting against her feet. Willow lay curled beside him, her tail flicking in her sleep. She flipped through the worn pages, years of entries, sketches, clippings, and letters. The very first page still bore the words she'd written in fear and hope. "We found a dog in the woods today. I don't know if he'll survive, but I know we have to try." Now here she was, 2 years later. A family forever changed. A story forever shared. She began writing again, slowly. "Dear Ranger, one day Evan will grow up. He'll go farther than the fields behind this cabin. He'll face storms you can't chase off and nights you can't lie beside him through. But what you gave him, that will stay. You've etched safety into his bones, courage into his breath, love into the way he sees the world. You gave him roots and wings. And one day when someone else is lost, he'll remember the dog who never left his side, and he'll know how to help them find their way back." She closed the journal gently, heart full. That night, under a velvet sky sprinkled with stars, the family sat around a backyard fire pit. Evan roasted a marshmallow for Willow, who sniffed it and then laid her head on his lap. Ranger lay on a soft blanket beside Emily, his eyes half-lidded, soaking in the warmth. Sam strummed his old guitar, softly humming a tune that sounded like home. No cameras, no audience, just them. The boy who learned to love with his whole heart, the shepherd who taught him how, the collie who carried the torch, and the parents who watched it all unfold with a kind of awe no words could hold. Later that night, as the fire burned down to embers and the cabin lights dimmed, Evan climbed into bed, his hand still holding onto Ranger's collar tag. "You're my forever dog," he whispered. "Even when I'm big, even when you're a star." And Ranger, as if sensing the weight of those words, pressed his head against the boy's chest, eyes closed, breath slow and steady. A few months later, Ranger passed away in his sleep. No struggle, no pain, just peace. He was wrapped in his favorite blanket, his head resting beside Evan's pillow, with Willow sleeping silently at his side. The Parker family buried him beneath the big oak tree in the backyard, the place Evan had first drawn maps, held pretend meetings, and whispered dreams into his dog's ears. They marked the spot with a smooth stone, engraved with a single word. Ranger, the one who stayed. The Ranger Project lives on. So does hope on pause. And in homes and hospitals and hearts across the country, the ripple continues. Rescues becoming healers, children finding strength, families discovering what it means to truly be found. Willow carries the mission forward now. And Evan? He's almost 6. He still draws pictures of Ranger, still wears the red cape when he reads stories out loud, still tells anyone who asks, "My dog saved me, and now I help him save the world." Because some love stories begin with rescue, but the best ones, they never really end. They become forever. If this story touched your heart even half as much as it touched ours, don't leave without showing some love. Subscribe to Pawprints forever for more true stories of animals who change lives in the most unexpected ways. Like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances. And please tell us in the comments, what part of Ranger's journey moved you the most? Ranger may be gone now, but his legacy is still saving lives. Because some stories don't end when the last chapter closes. Some stories live on, in Pawprints, forever.